All right, so that's pretty much it. Showing off the example of the rendered videos there. You did see how we went around and captured those, and then you can utilize those later for kind of more optimal performance with those 360 video spheres. We also talked a little bit about the UI system and how to kind of lay it out to be a little bit more spatially and make more sense in VR with the curved UI. And then lastly, I just did a quick walkthrough of kind of setting up and configuring a character to basically allow you to put yourself inside. And that's, a really important, interesting aspect of virtual reality is kind of going inside a character and kind of feeling that body presence in VR. And so, again, I just wanted to reiterate, these are all kind of packs that are included in these VR essentials, and that you basically kind of get to pick which one is most applicable to you. And so, we definitely recommend checking these out. And these are all asset store packages that are also available outside the essentials pack. And so you can kind of go and pick them up at your leisure. And so to end, I just want to say, thanks a lot for following along, and thanks a lot for viewing. I will have a little bit of time for some Q&A right now. If you guys have any general questions for that, for me, I'll be watching a chat right now. So someone's asking about support for the HoloLens. So basically the way the HoloLens works is it is kind of similar to a VR headset in that it has this kind of motion tracked similar to the head is. Now you're not going to have any really hand poses, but you could potentially get a little bit of the automatic feet movement and the body positioning there. So yeah, potentially you could use this in a HoloLens, and then depending on if it's like a networked experience or just in general, it's always kind of an interesting idea to add like a mirror or something like that to your application to I guess, see your digital self. So someone's asking, what's the best way to manage performance in desktop VR when dealing with a scene of hundreds of dynamic objects? Would the number of unique materials in the scene impact performance heavily, or are there other areas that can be optimized? So in general, yeah, you're going to want to be careful with having multiple materials as well as references to textures. So a kind of clever trick that this is using is it's using a lot of kind of vertex shaded materials, or where basically these are all sharing. So you can see here this albedo is just kind of these flat colors with some gradients on them, and then almost every object in the scene is using the same material. So definitely optimize for things like that. Yeah, with draw calls, material usage, and textures as well. Yeah, so someone's asking about rendering to a photo or video. Basically, yeah, a video is going to be a lot more optimized. One of the things here is basically the reason I tried to do a video was just because there was a couple dynamic elements. And so if you don't really have dynamic elements, but you still have a really interesting and well lit scene, then yeah, you can just go ahead and use an image just fine. And the configuration basically on the camera is, instead of doing an animation sequence, you just highlight it over to image, and then that actually allows you to use a hotkey to just capture where the camera's at there. So yeah, some people are talking about some kind of spatialized audio. And definitely what I recommend for that, especially depending on cross-platform ability, is Google's spatialized audio plugin. There's some interesting things where you can set up kind of the bounce surfaces and things like that, depending on the room you're in, and then get some really nice effects. And so even if you're not on Google Daydream, which a lot of people think it is targeting, it's actually more open and works on platforms even like the web. And so I definitely recommend checking out that Google Audio Spatializer. And you can download the Daydream elements from Google's developer site, and that has that kind of packaged in with some example scenes. Someone's asking about using curved UI for creating HUD. Yeah, and actually the curved UI example scenes actually has a reference to kind of a heads-up display, similar to like a Metroid style and things like that. And so you could use it kind of as this visor. I can open up that scene here, so you can see it right down here. And so this is, again, right there, and you can see that it's actually curved, and they've done like almost a full sphere here to get that curved visor look, so that when you're looking around at the 3D object, you still get that nice curvature. Someone's asking, will you have a tutorial for proper usage of reflection probes and lights in VR? I'm not sure if we'll be approaching that specifically. One thing I will say is that a lot of the default settings for both of those, especially with reflection probes, are not optimized for VR or low-end platforms at all. Their kind of default settings was more tuned towards a high-end desktop, and so really kind of dialing those back is something you want to be careful of. As far as lights, I mean, just kind of restricting them as much as you can, doing as many kind of light bakes, and restricting the number of dynamic lights is always good. We recommend using light probes if you're not familiar with those, and kind of positioning those throughout your scene can help you get some of the dynamicness of lights, but without such a high performance cost. So someone's asking if it's compatible with Leap Motion. I'm not sure if you're talking about the curved UI system, but depending on your platform, it does have gaze detection, and it is fairly extensible to allow different sort of inputs if you wanted to use kind of a touch finger or something like that. How did I make the sphere with swap normals? I just went into Maya and then just created a primitive sphere and inverted the normals and exported it. So people asking kind of the best distance between the VR main menu and the camera for best user experience. So a little bit of that is going to be related to kind of how big your text and font size is, you know, relative to where you position it in the world. Again, that kind of image I showed earlier, I can pull that up right here, basically says that anything beyond 20 meters of yourself is probably too far. So kind of putting it in that main content zone is always a good idea. And I definitely recommend checking out Mike's video. You can see I have it listed down there at the bottom of that picture. Does Unity have any built-in features for VR menus? So not necessarily, and you know, that kind of comes back to the idea of what you want your menu to do and what you're trying to accomplish. And so in the past, I've made kind of an inventory system, but it wasn't really related to any sort of traditional inventory system that you'd see. So it's hard for Unity to kind of have a blanket over generic things like that. And so especially with VR, you know, I always encourage people to really think outside the box. And so, you know, reapproaching what a menu or UI system might be. Now for the normal button systems, that's, you know, definitely what this curved UI asset really helps out with. So someone was asking if the video in the scene works in 3D, meaning is there depth in the video? I believe there is not depth in the video right now. It's just kind of basically, yeah, 2D VR as you said there. So someone was asking how you go about adding UI to the hands or controllers, and so that can actually be done again using that world space canvas. So, you know, by default, when you make UI elements on the canvas, they're going to be in screen space. And by converting them to world space, that allows you to basically position them anywhere in the world. And you could kind of, you know, child them to the controllers yourself. And then when you looked at the controller, those canvas elements and UI elements would just be there. So someone's asking about the feasibility of using real-time lighting in VR. It depends a little bit on your platform. So there are some optimized shaders for Google Daydream called the Daydream Renderer, and that has some pretty good kind of optimizations that are done with that, where they're using vertex lighting and certain shader passes. And so I would definitely consider that. For high end, you know, we definitely recommend potentially having one or two real-time lights and kind of restricting what is actually being affected by those. And so using some of the layer systems to do that would be recommended. So someone's asking how the UI is getting curved. It's basically using kind of a special shader on top of our built-in UI system to affect that. And one interesting thing, this is kind of a flat back there, and that you can see that it's still relative there, but as I affect the curvature on here and do things like that, you can actually see that when I click on it, it's still this square behind it. So someone's asking about Unity particle effects in VR, and so In the past experience, I've used them fairly heavily. You just have to be a little bit careful about how many you're allowing on screen and how you're allowing those to come out. So in the past, I've used burst, and so it comes out in one burst of maybe 10 to 50 particles, and then we kind of clear that up. But thinking about those a little bit differently, and then one thing I've personally noticed with the particles and just in VR is that I always try to use meshes. And so you'll see in my little fire here, we go to our particle system. So these are actually, the smoke is just spheres, and then the fire is kind of these little triangle meshes that I created. And so by making these 3D elements, so if I go to the particle system in the renderer, you can see that we're using this mesh down here. And so by using these 3D elements, then you actually get a little bit more of the depth, where traditional particles are just kind of the 2D billboards. And so doing this, helps people understand and view them correctly in VR. But again, for use cases, you just have to be careful with how many you're allowing here in the max particles, and then the rate over time with the emission. All right, so I think the questions are wrapping up a little bit, but I'll just put this last slide on here. These are the comment trainers, and I've kind of added my Twitter handle there at the end. If you would like to follow me on the internet, I occasionally tweet about AR and VR things, as well as some memes. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed the session and hopefully learned a thing or two.